Welcome, everybody, to this Rising Tide Foundation special where we are continuing our exposition into American system studies. So what was this thing that emerged out of the American Revolution that can really be seen as a metaphysical technology of sorts, that a technology of government, and also not just government detached from economy, but the science of political economy as something which was tied directly not to a monetary conception, but rather the idea that value is located in the cognitive powers of sovereign individuals that compose together the government, as a willful act of self-reflection, that we could choose to adopt as true citizens who earned their rights through a bloody conflict and a lot of risk, but that emerged with a better sense of natural law. But to actualize those ideas, it required the practical manifestation of something which was innovated by the likes of people like Ben Franklin and especially Alexander Hamilton, who had a very firm grasp of universal history, the nature of humankind, the nature of the creative powers of healthy, integrated human minds, and how that all shapes the role of a sovereign nation state capable of carrying out those ideals contained in the Declaration of Independence, as well as in the Constitution, that cherish both the inalienable rights of the individual, but also at the same time, the general welfare of that society as a whole. Two concepts that are not to be seen as contradictory, but rather very compatible, but that require a different sense of culture, and what is the purpose of value, of investment, and everything else that currently is taken for granted. So Alex has done an immense amount of work. He and Fox have collaborated to great effect on the Space Commune, which people could get a subscription for the either free or paid upgrades. I do the paid upgrade, and I think everyone should do that if they can. A lot of multimedia videos, a lot of high quality analysis that people could find there on a pretty regular basis. So I've been really amazed to see some of that work, and so that'll be a link in the description box. Space Commune Substack. Alex is going to go through a lot, and Alexander Hamilton is a figure who is very maligned, misunderstood, and those who either love him or hate him often don't really know the real Alexander Hamilton. They don't understand the fight. And by design, those who like him for the wrong reasons or hate him for the wrong reasons, both have been victimized by misinformation that's been carried out multi-generationally to get us to become confused about who and what Alexander Hamilton actually was, what he was doing. And Alex has put his finger on that. So Alex, without further ado, I'm going to sit back, take some notes, and then afterwards we're going to open up for some dialogue with the audience. It's all yours, man.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for the intro. And anybody here that's watching, just feel free to shout out any questions that come to mind as we go. I'm happy to address things, or just wait till the end. That's fine too. So I'm going to share my screen here, and we'll get this going. Let's see. Does that work? Do you guys see that? Yes? Okay, good. Okay, so we're going to go into the presentation. And as Matt said, Alexander Hamilton is one of these figures in history that some people like him, some people hate him, some people like him for the wrong reasons. And I have a lot of affinity for him. I have the same first name, Alex Dimitrios, and another Alex in the presentation is going to be Alexander von Humboldt, another misunderstood Alex, just like me. And we're going to go through a few other figures in history too. A number of the things I'm going to go over have been things that Matt and Cynthia have presented on in a smaller way. I'm connecting a number of stories together that have all been told before, but I don't think they've been connected in this way before. So just bear with me, but it's a number of things that you've probably heard of in some capacity, and they all make sense. They all fit together. So without further ado, we're going to go into this. So this is going to be about water. And as the United Nations says, water is life. Water for people, water for life. And there are a number of views about water. Some people say water is sacred. And if someone's trying to take your water, you have to protect it. Water, you have to hoard the water. You have to have the water rain down on your land and then have it wash away and not use it for anything, because that's how nature intended. Other people say water is a commodity. Water is something by the drop of water. We can be selling it, we can be bottling it, we can be extracting it for profit, and that's a very utilitarian view of it. A third view as Matt was just saying, similar to Alexander Hamilton's views on man, water can be seen as a foundation for human creativity and development. And when you think about water that way, it's a secret third way to think about water. That's neither saying that water is just coming down from God, we can't do anything with it, or having an extremely utilitarian view of water. It's something else. So we're going to go to the start of Hamilton's vision for New York City's economic rise. And this goes back to the 1790s. New York City was burned down in the Revolutionary War. They were rebuilding it because it was at the heart of the Hudson River, which was the gateway to New England and to upstate New York. So it was a very important port city. So it was rebuilding very quickly after World War II. The 1790s had 33,000 residents. And Alexander Hamilton, he was a huge part of New York City growing back after the Revolutionary War. So 1784, he founded the Bank of New York, which was a bank to enable the kind of development that Matt was just talking about. 1791, Hamilton issues the Report on Manufactures. He is Washington's first Treasury Secretary. So, he has a view of how banking can be used to enable development. And in the Report on Manufactures, he talks about the importance of water. It's focusing on industry, but he's saying that access to water is critical for industry to develop. So the National Bank enabled long-term projects, which were essential for economic transformation. That meant investing in infrastructure like roads, canals, and ports. And the infrastructure, in turn, enabled an increase in the productive power of labor. So the report on manufacturers also talks about protective tariffs, which are a huge topic right now. But it was combined with infrastructure investment. So it wasn't just tariffs for the sake of it. It was a plan to use tariffs in conjunction with a really pro-industrial policy to increase national productivity. And he promoted the export of finished goods rather than raw materials to prevent the country from being looted by free trade in Britain, ultimately. So in 1798, New York City is growing, like I said, 33,000 people, and they start to have yellow fever outbreaks. And yellow fever throughout sorry, I'm emitting somebody, throughout the development of civilization, especially in this hemisphere, yellow fever keeps popping up. It's transmitted by mosquitoes. It's really nasty. You can see in that illustration there how devastating yellow fever was. It endangered public health. It comes up quite a bit whenever major infrastructure projects are undertaken in South America. The mosquitoes from yellow fever just wreak havoc on those projects. And actually, yellow fever was largely addressed with the advent of DDT in the 50s and 60s because it's caused by mosquitoes, and DDT was killing the mosquitoes. But it always pops back up. So in 1798, the water crisis is going on in New York City. They don't have access to clean water. It's causing people to die from yellow fever in droves. And in the very same year, Thomas Malthus publishes his loathsome essay on the principle of population. And this essay is, it started a lot. It was the continuation of a lot of previous work, by Adam Smith. But also it establishes, a pattern throughout history that we see where there's always people who pop up and say that there are limits to growth, that there are things that that man cannot figure out how to overcome, and that if we have too many people, then it's not sustainable. There's no way for man to develop and grow a population that has a higher and higher standard of living. But so in 1798, New York City has a choice. They can say, okay, well, you know what? We got 30,000 people. That's enough. We don't have to develop anymore. Malthus is right. But instead, in this atmosphere of the American system and this defiance to the Malthusian British free trade ideology, New York City says, actually, we're going to build infrastructure to overcome these problems. We're going to find water where it is and bring it to where it isn't, which is New York City. So they rejected Malthusianism by committing to building water infrastructure. Here we go. Okay, so at this time, a guy named Aaron Burr shows up, and he's a bad guy. He ends up killing Hamilton a few years later, and he's just his history is very checkered, very shady. And what he does is that he tricks Hamilton. This is a little bit before Jefferson runs for president. Hamilton's trying to navigate and work with Burr. So Aaron Burr says, "Okay, you know what? You guys need water. We don't have enough public money to build infrastructure in New York City. So we're going to start something called the Manhattan Company." And the Manhattan Company was a private company, private utility company that was going to solicit investment and then use the money to build water infrastructure for New York City. And he gets Hamilton's support. And the plan is that they're going to build infrastructure to get water from the Bronx River, bring it to Manhattan, and then solve the water problem. But hidden in the bylaws of the Manhattan Company is a clause. And it says that money that is surplus can be used for moneyed transactions, which basically is legalese for saying that the water company is really a bank. And and the reason why Burr is doing this is not just because he wanted to make money for himself. It was because Hamilton and the Federalists and the Society of Cincinnati, they were the ones in control of the national bank, and they were using it in many people's opinion for good in the country. And Burr had some other plans for the country. He wanted to help break up the country. He wanted to be a counter. He wanted to lead the resistance to the Federalists, with this rising tide of Jeffersonianism. So they start the Manhattan Company, and really it's not about water. It's about using the water crisis to create a bank. So they mislead Hamilton. Hamilton initially supports it. The text here says, "And it be further enacted that it shall and may be lawful for the said company to employ all such surplus capital as may belong or accrue to the said company in the purchase of public or other stock, or in any money transactions or operations not inconsistent with the Constitution and laws of the state or the United States, for the sole benefit of the said company." So so they get $2 million invested, and they only use $100,000 of it for the water system. The other 95% of it they use to start the Bank of the Manhattan Company, which opens up on Wall Street in 1799. And what this bank does, this is the Bank of Tammany Hall. So Aaron Burr in New York City in 1799, he is there for the creation of the institution known as Tammany Hall, which starts as an unofficial institution, becomes very official, a building with an address and everything. And this is the hotbed of corruption in New York City. These are if you watched Gangs of New York or something like that, you can see that New York City is just becomes a madhouse. It's a corrupt, really corrupt, rough and tumble place. So you can, that's a political cartoon depicting the chaos that Tammany Hall caused. So once again, Burr created the bank to fund Tammany Hall. It's crucial. This bank is crucial to funding Jefferson's 1800 win. It was just seen as a way to circumvent the Hamiltonian bank that was about infrastructure. This bank was about insider deals and political cronyism, which is why that at the time that they're doing all these banking shenanigans, the water crisis remains unaddressed. So by 1802, Manhattan Company's been in business for 3 years. They haven't done anything. They barely built any pipe. It was inadequate. It was poorly maintained. Yellow fever outbreaks continued. The city kept catching fire because of the lack of water. It used to be that the British would set the city on fire. At this point, the city is so poorly managed that it just catches fire. They can't put it out. And a Malthusian, an environmentalist today, would look at it and say, well, this is what happens when you play with the limits to growth. You guys are developing too much. This is why this is happening. But the reality is, it's that it's corruption. It's this usurious use of banking where They're using the bank to make money, to turn money into more money, rather than using the bank to use the debt for infrastructure. Just admit somebody. Okay, so by 1832, I think I skipped where Hamilton dies, but anyway, Hamilton figures out what's going on. He sees that the bank is used for Jefferson's political run. And you guys all know the story that Hamilton and Burr end up having a duel um, where Burr murders Hamilton. And a big part of the disagreement was how Burr misled Hamilton and created this bank. So what happens to the bank after all that? The Manhattan Company loses its monopoly on the city's water supply. So after the city gives the Manhattan Company and Burr about 30 years. Burr, I think he gets pushed out of the Manhattan Company pretty quickly after the Hamilton debacle. He goes into exile, and we'll talk about where he ends up. But in the meantime, the Manhattan Company has another 30 years of starts and stops. They don't really accomplish anything. And in 1832, the city voted to break the monopoly that the Manhattan Company held, and they voted to expand their water supply. So in 1837, they start building a what's called the Croton Reservoir, which is the first time where they go into upstate New York. They create a reservoir of water that collects water from rain and from runoff, and then they use gravity for that water to be transported through tunnels to get to New York City. So by 1842, they celebrate the completion of the Croton Reservoir, and by the 1880s, this reservoir is obsolete. New York City keeps growing. So what happens to the Manhattan Company? The Manhattan Company, in order to maintain their charter as a bank, they had to ceremonially pump water every day. So they maintained one pump after they lose their monopoly, and they have someone go outside once a day and just pump it one time, and that allows them to keep their charter as a bank. And they kept doing that until 1923, even though it was just a bank. So it turns into Chase Manhattan Bank. So if you go bank at Chase, and now they merged with JP Morgan Chase, just know that it started out as a water company founded by Aaron Burr. And today, JP Morgan Chase still displays the Burr Hamilton dual pistols. So that's like a little thing that they're proud of. And in 1887, when people were, I think firefighters were going through the rubble of some building in New York City, they actually unearthed an attempt of the Manhattan Water Company to build some infrastructure. They built a giant water tank, but it never got connected to anything. So they found that after a fire in New York City. So then what happens to Aaron Burr? Aaron Burr, after the duel, let's fix this. After the duel in 1804, Burr is politically exiled, and I've actually read this a great article that I've read from Matt Ehret's Insights on Substack. Check it out. He used the $40,000 gift from John Jacob Astor, a New York oligarch. He flees in disguise. He goes up to Canada. He hangs out with George Prevost, and then he makes his way over to England, and he starts staying with Jeremy Bentham. And Bentham is a British philosopher, and he is known as the father of utilitarianism, which is extremely important for the future of how we think about water, how we think about natural resources in the West. Jeremy Bentham also, he wrote The Defense of Usury. He wrote about the defense of pederasty. This man was a complete degenerate, but he also invented utilitarianism, which is an extremely accepted idea today. And it's arguably what drives a lot of how people in power think about natural resources. And Burr called Bentham the most perfect model of moral and intellectual excellence. So he was really impressed with Jeremy Bentham. And while he lived with Bentham, he did all kinds of scheming to undermine the American Republic, which is completely consistent with how he behaved when he was here. When New York City has a water crisis, all he can think about is how he can use it to create a bank to help his cronies and Tammany Hall and Jefferson, win short-term political battles. So you can see, that Burr's conflict with Hamilton wasn't just a personal conflict where, oh, he's jealous, they're not friends. It was an ideological battle, and it symbolizes this little story symbolizes the clash between the American system and this utilitarian British imperial free trade worldview. And Bentham's philosophy, going a little further into utilitarianism, it's about maximizing utility regardless of the higher principle, which is antithetical to Hamilton's vision of human dignity and national development. Um, so, Bentham is sometimes seen as kind of a liberal reformer, but he was a very subversive individual, possibly the head of British intelligence at the time. And if you watch a previous presentation that I did for Rising Tide about Gifford Pinchot and the battle between conservation and preservation for the soul of America, Jeremy Bentham's utilitarianism forms the basis of what I call eco-oligarchy, but what some people call the debate between conservation and preservation. So Bentham's legacy, utilitarianism can be summarized as the greatest happiness for the greatest number. And it's this kind of what it turns into once you involve data and numbers crunching about this. It's about, all decisions can be boiled down to a spreadsheet, like what people talk about effective altruism today. It's about, oh, well, if I give $1 to Bill Gates, he's going to buy mosquito nets. But if I give $1 to, the UN or whatever, I give $1 to a different philanthropist, he's gonna fund gene therapy, and which one provides the greatest good to the greatest number of people. And that's devoid of any of Hamiltonian ideal of having an idea and trying to see the idea through to the benefit of mankind. This is about just outcomes and speculation, basically. So if we talk about Benthamite utilitarianism, what emerges from that are a false dichotomy. The two choices that we supposedly have, excuse me, the two choices that we supposedly have for environmentalism and industry are either preservation, excuse me. Okay. Preservation, which is a romantic rejection of industry. And you can see that in the writings of Emerson and John Ruskin. Or you have conservation, which is a form of managed scarcity and sustainability. And that's, the guy in this picture, the two guys in this picture in this slide. On the left, you have John Muir, who is kind of this proto-hippie preservationist. And what the belief of preservation is that everything as it is, as it was created, is the way it's supposed to be. We don't have any right to change it. Conservation, on the other hand, says that it's a kind of a technocratic way of managing the resources that we have without ever trying to innovate and burst through the limits to growth. It just says, okay, so we have 100 trees. If we take 10 trees every year, we have 90 trees, and then 5 trees will grow back, and then we're slowly winnowing down the number of trees, but it'll last a long time if we do it the smart way. And you should hire my friend because he is the best guy that knows about trees, and no one else can know. He's the keeper of the knowledge. So Gifford Pinchot, and he is Teddy Roosevelt's forestry minister. Teddy Roosevelt's a very famous, infamous person for his conservation ethos. So Pinchot, he what he sees is kind of a forebear of the Club of Rome and the limits to growth, where he thinks that there will be no war if all the countries in the world, all the nation states, they relinquish their right to develop and to innovate, and that they simply conserve the resources that they have. And this is kind of the way that guns, germs, and steel approaches things, or the Hobbesian war against all. It's just believing that okay, so in that country they have different bacteria, different fauna, and different soil and different genes, and they're always going to beat our country. So instead of fighting over our resources, we should just conserve and just you know winnow down and make the best of it instead of trying to innovate, having brilliant new ideas to develop. Um, yeah, and once again, I mean, this is just paving the way for elite-led global governance, and depriving nations of their right to develop. So that all sounds very depressing. But around this time, right after Hamilton is murdered by Burr, another Alexander comes onto the scene, and this is Alexander von Humboldt. And just like Alexander Hamilton, Alexander von Humboldt's legacy is actively being rewritten today. Alexander Hamilton. Um, I think liberal people are pretty skittish about Hamilton being a champion of tariffs, but because of the musical, they still like Hamilton. And Alexander von Humboldt, people like him today, liberals like him today because he liked flowers and fauna, and he liked to talk about how everything's interconnected and how changes in the environment affect different things. So today, you can see articles in the New Yorker claiming, "Oh, was Alexander von Humboldt the first environmentalist?" And things like that. And to write a book about Humboldt today, you pretty much have to focus on him being an environmentalist. Otherwise, it won't get published. But the reality is a little different. So Alexander von Humboldt, he was a German naturalist. He was friendly with Schiller. He was friendly with that kind of school of thought. And in the early 1800s, he explored South America to uncover how all the forces of nature are interlaced and interwoven. And he also promoted networks of communication beyond Napoleonic control. And he was friends with Washington Irving, James Fenimore Cooper, Samuel Morse. He ran in that sphere of patriots, of international patriots that were champions of republicanism. He advocated for individual freedom. He was an abolitionist. He inspired John Fremont's Republican campaign in 1856, which laid the foundation for Lincoln to run for president and win. In 1848, he wrote a book called Cosmos, which established that nature is not a Hobbesian war of all against all, but about a grand rational harmony. And a couple of the people that he inspired, like Friedrich Church and Charles Darwin, they followed in his footsteps. They took different paths. Darwin was inspired by Humboldt to travel to South America, and Darwin ended up he published his book about evolution in the same year that Alexander von Humboldt died. And his book on evolution kind of threw out von Humboldt's thesis, where von Humboldt believes that nature and all of our species are evolving together in harmony, whereas Darwin made it seem like, oh, we're all fighting against each other in this Malthusian this Malthusian duel to the death, where we're all fighting over scarce resources. But that's why it's so important to understand Alexander von Humboldt today, because he did not stand for that, but he gets lumped in with all that. A great quote from him: "The most important result of a rational inquiry into nature is to establish the unity and harmony of this stupendous force of force and matter." And another interesting thing about him, he believed in the suppression of all unnecessary detail when it comes to harmony. And that's a great metaphor for how he inspired the Hudson River School of Painting so much, because the Hudson River School of Painting is not about photorealism and zeroing in on little details. It's about the whole, painting the whole, and painting the sublime effect of viewing God's creation. So he wasn't just a guy that liked flowers and playing around in the jungle. Once he did that, he said that we need to build infrastructure to improve nature and also to enable man to coexist with nature even better. So he had a number of massive infrastructure proposals long before the Panama Canal was a realistic idea. And he saw infrastructure as a way to uplift the entire American continent. So he proposed a South American transport network. This is long before I did another presentation about the Trans-American Railroad and Highway, which became a proposal in the 1850s and 1860s. But around 1800, he's proposing a whole South American transport network. He also surveyed 9 different routes across the Americas. Um, Once again, these routes across Americas aren't just to say that, oh, people can take a walk and go for a nice trail ride. This is about enabling trade to get from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, unlocking a route to get to China, but also a way to break free of British naval dominance. So he analyzed a number of options to cut across the Americas, including the Panama route. And so the Panama Canal was basically his idea. He also he saw problems going on in Mexico with flooding and a lack of water. And he proposed using stepped lakes for irrigation and navigation in Mexico. So once again, this is not an environmentalist who says, "Oh, well, I understand the flora and the fauna and how everything it is coexisting together and how we should remove ourselves." He saw what was going on in Mexico and he said, actually, we need to transform nature and make it better, not only to support life, but also to support humans and to primarily to enable the creative development of humans. And he was against short-sighted utilitarian uses of infrastructure. Um, and also, he was one of the first observers of yellow fever in South America, um, and really foreseeing how it was going to affect future development projects. So Alexander von Humboldt, he kind of echoes, for he's a forebear of the later visions of people like Lincoln and JFK, because he saw infrastructure as human freedom made physical. Okay, so like I said, this is how von Humboldt is written about today. The New Yorker article recently, it just asks, did Alexander von Humboldt invent environmentalism? And that's just a ridiculous way to boil down who he is. And if you look at his actual words, especially in Cosmos, you'll see that the pro-human aspect of his work is what shines through today, and not, oh, just because he wrote about flowers and fauna, that means that he was an environmentalist. Um, so as you can see, this guy that understood these things so deeply and did this pioneering work, he layers on top of that the use of infrastructure to enable human freedom. Because ultimately he saw man as a creative, rational force in nature. He saw nature as a system to be understood, developed, and harmonized. And he saw science and technology as tools for beauty, utility, and the common good, but not for the sake of just being utilitarian and balancing a spreadsheet. Because ultimately he was a patriot. He supported Republican ideals and global development, and he was an abolitionist. Um, and then you compare that to Jeremy Bentham. And Jeremy Bentham, when people who support utilitarianism, they throw the word rational out there. And what they mean by rational is not this Republican use of the unrestrained development of the physical powers of humanity. When a Benthamite talks about rationality, they're saying that we're being rational because everything that you do will either serve human pleasure or utility, or it shouldn't be done. That we should be extracting resources and efficiency and doing this min-maxing of benefits and drawbacks. And this leads to a lot of short-term thinking. Um, Instead of thinking about how a certain decision will affect humans, morally or culturally over a long term, what they see, they end up seeing they end up even dehumanizing people, and we're seen as raw materials to be managed by experts. And when you start thinking about humans that way, you get into a lot of trouble, right? All right, so we went through the Manhattan Company, Aaron Burr, Alexander Hamilton, Alexander von Humboldt, and Jeremy Bentham. So that's a lot of stuff already. And we're going to get back to New York City now. So by the 1840s, New York City had already tapped out of the water that they were getting from the Croton Aqueduct, and they're just desperate for water. New York City is growing like crazy, in large part due to being the port where cotton from slaves and the South, the Confederacy, it makes its way up to New York City, and then from there it gets sent out to England. So New York City is developing a lot because of slavery, unfortunately. Um, and in order to support more industrial development in New York City, and as well to just keep providing enough water for all the people that are moving there, they start looking further north into New York State. And this is 1906 or so. So the Panama Canal is in development, and also the ideology of conservation versus preservation is being kind of fought out by Teddy Roosevelt and by his minions. So when it comes to looking north for more water, this is what's going on, right? Um, so they look to upstate New York, and this is where I come in. I live in this city, Kingston, New York, which is about 90 miles north of New York City. And Kingston is part of the Hudson Valley, which is where a lot of the Revolutionary War was fought between here and Albany. And the Revolutionary War is fought all up and down the Hudson River, because the Hudson River is what connects New York City and the Atlantic Ocean to New England. And if you can win and control the Hudson River, you can isolate New England from the rest of the country, and you can split the country up in two. So the Hudson River is very strategically important. Um, and what's going on in Ulster County and this area of upstate New York, which is where New York City is looking to get its water from, is that there's a lot of it's kind of a microcosm of a number of things happening in the country. So the city where I live, Kingston, was burned by the British in 1777, and Kingston was temporarily the capital of New York State. And after Kingston gets burned by the British, the capital moves to Albany. And so Kingston's kind of sabotaged. It never reaches its potential that it had. And what ends up happening is that as a result, there's no industry that really truly develops in the area. The area goes through booms and busts where different ideas, different things come up where they extract leather, they extract bluestone, they extract charcoal from the area, but nothing really sticks. They can't really do industrial scale farming. There's a weak base of industry here, and they rely heavily on property taxes. But because there's no industry, property owners constantly default on their taxes. So in 1884, this region had a huge tax crisis, and we were the only tax delinquent county in New York State. So what happens is that to fix the crisis, they invent something called keeping land forever wild. And you've all heard of this. This is the pledge that a lot of countries and areas of the world have, where they say, okay, you know what? To prevent development, prevent sprawl, we're going to keep the land forever wild. And what that means is that the land is protected from development forever. Taxes are paid on the land, but it's not developed, and you don't get those effects of development um, where industry is built, where you get all the halo effects of that, where people um, learn about science and production and then make their own discoveries and are able to build on that. It's just about keeping land in a state of arrested development where taxes are paid, but nothing happens on the land. And people just sit around and get addicted to opioids, which is literally what's happening here. Um, so this creates a big problem here. And this is why the land gets targeted for this extraction of water. So um, in the 1880s, New York City looks to this area that's already being protected from development. And they say, okay, we can keep, if they're okay with this, we're going to keep doing that. We're going to protect almost all the land from development and just develop a little bit of it to extract water and send it down to New York City. So by 1907, construction begins on the Ashokan Reservoir, which is a massive, massive reservoir. They bulldozed towns that were out here, and I'm totally for mega infrastructure projects. And I think any of us who are admiring what China is doing, what with the Belt and Road Initiative and in their own country, mega infrastructure projects are great as long as they can benefit the host community and the people that live around the mega infrastructure project. Then that's awesome. That is the best way to do it, and that's what Hamilton envisioned. And we'll see what later with NAWAPA, the North American Water and Power Alliance. That was also the plan there. But what this project did, the Ashokan Reservoir and the New York City water system, which is undeniably an engineering marvel, was that it prevented development from happening around it in a very utilitarian way, where resources are being extracted, but there's none of the halo effects of development. So it's kind of a Benthamite what's the word? Benthamite infrastructure project. So just like Aaron Burr's water company was masked as a banking scheme, this project was masked as a policy of centralized benefit at regional expense. And I'll explain why in a minute. So in one respect, it's an engineering marvel. They build a 120-mile aqueduct from upstate New York down to New York City. They're able to dig it below the Hudson River. It crosses under the Hudson River, so they're hundreds of feet under the surface. People said it was a more impressive engineering feat than the Panama Canal. And what this project does, it provides so much water to New York City that the population is able to double from about 3 million to 8 million by the 1970s. And it's undoubtedly national scale infrastructure for a public good. But the problem is that the costs were imposed so heavily on the host communities, and that means that water's once again being treated as a commodity and not a catalyst. And I'll explain what that means. What I mean by that. The reason why that it didn't really benefit the local communities is that they used the preservation ethos and all these ideas about nature, these really old, wrong-headed ideas about nature, to plan the area around the reservoirs. And what I mean by that is that originally they were supposed to build a filtration plant It would have cost about $17 million dollars in 1910 money. And what this filtration plant would have done, it would have filtered out a lot of the effluents and contamination that gets into water. And what that would do, that filtration plant, that would enable the area around the reservoirs to be more developed, to have more human activity. But instead, what they did, they said, oh, you know what? We're going to build the reservoirs, we're going to build the water system, but we're not going to build a filtration plant. And what we'll do instead of the filtration plant is that we're going to keep the area around the reservoirs forever wild, which will be a better way to, it's much cheaper to do that to prevent development than it is to develop. Um, and the idea is that okay, so let's say around the reservoirs, you can't open a business, you can't build a factory, you can't farm with modern agricultural tools, you can't have a gas station, or you can't extract resources, you can't develop resources there. All you can do is keep the surrounding area with trees and dirt, because basically what the region turns into is a giant bucket of water, where water flows down from the mountains and it collects in the reservoirs, and then it gets shot down to New York City. And because there's no filtration, they're relying completely on keeping the surrounding area undeveloped. And this is something called a filtration avoidance determination. And there's 6 cities in the United States that do this, where, Seattle, New York City, and a few others, where basically they've obtained a waiver from the federal government that says that they don't have to filter their water. They're just going to keep massive areas of land undeveloped, and that's the filtration. So that's nice for the city, but up here, we calculated, roughly how much this is costing the area in lost development, lost tax revenue, lost population growth. At this point, it's cost far more, $38 billion dollars over the lifetime of the New York City water system, to keep the area undeveloped versus just building a filtration plant. And you can see that here, the county I live in, 32% of the land you can't do anything with by law. 32% of the land is just cut off from development, which means that we're in a state of arrested development, and the opportunities for people here are much less, and that's why problems like homelessness, opioid addiction, poverty are skyrocketing. Is that one? There are no good jobs for local people, and then two, what happens is, as people die or leave, in search of a better life, they get replaced by people from New York City who work in Wall Street, or have kind of email job kind of things. They come up here, and this perpetuates a cycle. So there's no development and no prospects for development. So, and this is the opposite of Hamiltonian economics, where you're always looking to do industrial development to uplift human spirit. So this idea, forever wild and keeping giant areas of your country undeveloped, this has made its way into the international world. So when you hear about the UN 30 by 30 goals, that's what this is. They're saying that 30% of the world must be protected from development forever by law by 2030. And then people assume that, okay, so if you keep things undeveloped as nature intended, that we're somehow saving the planet and helping people, which is, I think, is demonstrated to be completely false here. Like the county I live in is 32% protected from development, and we have massive problems here. And if it wasn't for rich people from New York City buying up land, there'd be no economic activity here. And I think, as especially with the tariffs going on and some of the turmoil in the stock market, our area, when this protection is made in the name of resilience and sustainability, we're actually the least resilient and sustainable area of New York State, because there is no development here, and we're very susceptible to these changes in the stock market. So to take the story a little further, and then I'm going to connect it to some other things, I promise. I don't want to keep talking about where I live, but I have to. Uh, so in the 1990s, there's kind of a tipping point. So the New York City water system had been here for about 90 years, and a federal law came about that said that we either have to, New York City either has to start filtering the water, or they have to prove that they're doing enough to prevent development around the reservoirs to in order to keep doing things that way. And there's a local politician here who said that he's talking about how New York City is cracking down even more on development. He's saying, first they moved us out of the hills, but they put us on the hills in the first place. So to build the reservoir, they displaced thousands of people, and now they're displacing people even further to keep the area undeveloped. And what ends up happening here, even in the 90s, 40% of renters can't afford market rents. Young people don't stay because there's no jobs here, there's no housing. Any kind of business investment is blocked by water regulations. New York City has final say over everything. There's a town just a couple of towns over where 60% of the land is owned by either New York City or New York State. And so, I mean, it's just impossible to do any kind of economic development. And, I don't always want to, I feel like Fox and I, we get a bad rap sometimes because we're always connecting things to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., but he was right here for so long. And, he had his hands in so many things. So, he shut down our nuclear plant that was right here. But also he got really involved in this water idea, New York City's water system. And as you can guess, in the 90s, he was a huge proponent of preventing development around the reservoirs because it was cheaper for New York City. And he didn't care that, it was going to hurt the local communities so much because he was known, there are stories that he was like running around New York City screaming at people to not drink the water because it was, so contaminated and so disgusting. Even though it was fine, New York City is known for having some of the best water in the country, but he acted like it was just riddled with pollution and all this unnatural stuff, which was going to, contaminate your precious bodily fluids. And he was just trying to make people feel schizophrenic and I don't know, not good. So by the 1990s, it was on the table. Like either New York City was going to build a filtration plant and enable development around the reservoirs in the tradition of Hamilton, or they had a more Benthamite idea, which was to secure a filtration avoidance determination and prioritize the people in New York City and saving a little money over enabling human flourishing up here. So Robert F. Kennedy Jr. shows up. People in the Catskills despised him. They called him a Fifth Avenue environmentalist. They saw him as kind of this. He had no standing. He didn't live up here. His organization, Riverkeeper, they were involved in the Hudson River, which was 100 mile, 50 miles away from the New York City water system. But even so, he inserted himself in the middle of it. And he was the one applying pressure to not develop around the water system. So anyway, so New York City ends up saying, okay, you know what? This is great that this guy Bobby Kennedy is here to tell us to save money. We're going to do that. We're not going to let the Catskills develop. And what they did, they're granted the filtration avoidance determination. And what happens is instead of spending $5 billion for a filtration plant, instead they spend about $1 billion buying land around the reservoirs. So again, this is about preventing development. They buy the land, they pay taxes on it, and nothing is done with the land by law. It's all just preservation. And this idea was called into question. There's a philosopher named Mark Sagoff who, he's kind of an environmentalist, but he was calling out some of the hypocrisies and things that don't make sense about environmentalism. So he wrote an article called "The Catskills Parable" about this very thing, and calling into question this idea of preser preservation, where we all have this idea in our head. When you watch commercials for bottled water, or you think about contamination in water, and you're like, oh, you just picture the babbling brook, and maybe a deer is dipping its head down and sipping from the water, and there are birds flying over and fish swimming in the water, and like, ah, yes, that's what I want. I want to drink, from my metal water bottle. I want to get it right from there, and mm, so good. But what he was talking about in his essay was that actually, when you deal with water that way, and you're serving that kind of water to your population, nature introduces impurities and microorganisms into the water, because animals are pooping all in the water. There's they call it, giardia. That's what causes people to get really sick when you don't boil your water. Um, and all these natural contaminations that occur that are not caused by humans, they're just what happens to water. It's actually a completely false idea that somehow nature is better at cleaning our water than humans could be. So he writes, this is very similar to Thomas Cole quotes that Fox has talked about in previous presentations. Few of us wish to admit that we benefit from nature, not by preserving it, but by improving it. For example, by plowing a field, building a road, constructing a house, drilling a well, damming a river, farming a salmon or oyster, or altering a genome. Most of us would rather believe that nature knows best. We will therefore repeat the Catskills parable, even though it is factually false. This image is from I think it's from a Rising Tide presentation, but so I want to introduce JFK now. I I talk bad about Bobby, but JFK, the reason why the Kennedy name is so resonant with people is that JFK was a great leader and he had a lot of really good ideas. Um, so JFK introduced, I guess he brought alive again a way to think about water, which is much more in line with Hamilton, and much against the way that Jeremy Bentham, Aaron Burr, RFK Jr. think about water, which is, either short term benefit, or just, keeping it natural around the water, and that's it. JFK had a continental imagination for water that transcended this false paradigm. So what JFK proposed, I don't know if he actually called it NAWAPA, but he proposed a continental scale mega project that would bring water from Canada, from Alaska, British Columbia, and the Yukon, and redirect it using canals, tunnels, and reservoirs to water the West and water Mexico, bring water to Mexico, and also along the way generate energy using hydropower. So a massive amount of energy. Hydropower is, once the dams can be built, it's a very clean way to generate electricity. Water keeps running and the electricity keeps being generated. The biggest power plant in New York State is the Niagara Falls electric, hydropower plant. So this built on the ideas of Hamilton and of Alexander von Humboldt. Humboldt literally proposed the exact same thing in South America. And this is seeing water not as just something to be hoarded, but as an instrument of unity, development, and beauty. And what this proposal ended up being called was the North American Water and Power Alliance, or NAWAPA. And this is the real legacy. The NAWAPA proposal was probably the latest thing in history where the legacy of the American system was being pushed forward and iterated on. And this is what's missing from how New York City treats water in upstate New York. It's about solving scarcity through ambition and not managing decline through restriction. And this is a beautiful quote on conservation. This touches on all the stuff that I talked about, the false dichotomy of how people think about nature and conservation. JFK, this is a direct quote. I won't do a JFK accent, but there are 2 points on conservation that have come home to me in the last 2 days. One is the necessity for us to protect what we already have, what nature gave us, and use it well, not to waste water or land, to set aside land and water, recreation, wilderness, and all the rest now, so that it will be available to those who come in the future. That is the traditional concept of conservation, and it still has a major part in the national life of the United States. But the other part of the conservation is the newer part, and that is to use science and technology to achieve significant breakthroughs, as we are doing today, and in that way to conserve the resources which 10 or 20 or 30 years ago may have been wholly unknown. Now, you have to think about the context of what was going on in the United States at this time. A woman named Rachel Carson had just written a book called Silent Spring, and it was a phenomenon in the United States. And part 3 of the Energy Empire documentary series that Fox has been working on is going to go into great depth about this. But basically, Rachel Carson, Silent Spring, this was kind of a Rudolf Steiner anthroposophy revival that was going on in the country at the time. And JFK, he had to balance, he was navigating, he had a lot of things coming at him. And he did have to nod to traditional conservation, utilitarian ideas. But you can see in the second part of the statement, he does what they call in the improv world, a yes and. He says, yes, we should manage our resources wisely, but also we should be developing new resources and new technologies like nuclear power, like mega infrastructure projects, and that these can help us bust through these limits to growth. And then in the future, we could have the great honor of using new resources like uranium, for example. Uranium, we have so much uranium in the world that um, right now we can't imagine using all of it. But someday we're going to need to develop nuclear fusion, which would be even cheaper and be even more abundant, create even more energy, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to play a quick clip of JFK talking about a NAWAPA style infrastructure project. We can just listen to it.
We must maintain an aggressive program to use our hydro resources to the fullest. Every drop of water.
Can you guys hear that? Okay, cool.
Which goes to the ocean without being used for power or used to grow or being made available on the widest possible base is a waste. And I hope that we will do everything we can to make sure that nothing runs to the ocean unused and wasted. And secondly, we can meet our electric power goals by developing new means of making our vast resources of coal more competitive in the generation of electricity. Coal is an old fuel, but we're going to find new techniques for using it, which is going to make it one of the most advanced of all human fuels. And third, as is well known here at Hanford, we must hasten the development of low-cost atomic power. I think we should lead the world in this. By 1967, 68, 1970, in the Northeast United States, where power rates are nearly double yours, we're going to find atomic power increasingly competitive. And by the end of this century, this is going to be a tremendous source. Our experts estimate that half of all electric energy generated in the United States will come from nuclear sources.
So yeah, see, there's so much in that quote that runs counter. And again, what I said earlier about Alexander Hamilton's legacy being written, Alexander von Humboldt's legacy being rewritten, and now JFK's legacy being rewritten, where I have a book where it talks about how Rachel Carson and JFK were, they set the course for modern environmentalism. But if you look at JFK's actual words and his deeds, he was in that quote, that video, he's talking about nuclear energy. He's talking about finding ways to make coal more efficient. Coal is a very cheap source of energy. It can be dirty. It's China's major source of power. But in China, what they've been doing is that they're working with it. It's what they have to work with, and they've found ways to increase yields from coal while minimizing pollution, and that can be done here too. And then finally, hydropower through NAWAPA. JFK is saying every drop of water, we have to find ways to generate electricity with it. And that's a great way to think about things. And RFK Jr., on the other hand, or environmentalists like that, I use him as a stand-in for modern environmentalism, which is about shutting everything down and saying that any contamination is too much. No amount of risk is acceptable. His organizations like Riverkeeper and Waterkeeper, they're constantly destroying dams. They're constantly ripping up hydropower plants. They're constantly shutting down nuclear plants. Whereas the actual legacy of JFK was not to say that, oh yeah, we should maximize every inch of the earth to for the short-term benefit of man to make a quick buck. No, he was saying let's improve nature, not being wasteful, but also embracing new technologies that can enable human flourishing and enable industry. So I'm going to play another quick video. This is a little longer, but this is an engineering firm called Parsons. They were in charge of the NAWAPA proposal in the 60s. And they made a little film about their plans for NAWAPA and what it is, and explaining the benefits in a very positive way. So I'm just going to play. I might play all of it. It's 6 or 7 minutes, and then we'll pretty much wrap up the presentation and chat after this. So I'm just going to play this.
On a relatively small planet, the surface of which is 2/3 water. In an eternal cycle, moisture from evaporation rises into the air. Clouds form, condensation takes place. Snow and rain fall upon the earth to be distributed by river systems throughout the land. Rivers which in turn flow back into the sea, so that the cycle can begin again. Historically, growth and economic development have always been dependent on ample supplies of fresh water. But today, advancing technology and expanding industry on a broad international scale have achieved a rate never before equaled. At the same time, however, management of water resources has not kept pace. It has become more and more apparent that one of the great problems facing the world is water and its proper management, its collection, its distribution, its disposal, and the interrelations that tie these features together, such as flood control, pollution control, conservation, recreation, irrigation, hydropower development, and reuse. To meet the critically urgent needs as they exist today and in the foreseeable future, requires more than just ample supplies of fresh water. It takes the total planning of overall water management. The water problem has traditionally been considered a local or regional problem, but it is not local or regional. It is a continental problem, which requires a solution on a scale that is also continental. Motion picture is about the North American Water and Power Alliance, NAWAPA. NAWAPA has been conceived as one possible solution to help the collection and distribution segments of the overall continental water management problem. In terms of water, power, flood control, transportation, and recreational facilities, more than 33 of the states would directly benefit. In Canada, 7 provinces and 1 territory would directly benefit, as would regions in northern Mexico. On our continent, it is estimated that in less than 40 years, water usage for municipal, industrial, and agricultural requirements will more than double the figures for the year 1960. Growing needs are such that someday we may be able to meet those needs only by utilizing every means to procure fresh water. Where there are no resources of fresh water to develop, desalination is the only way. Therefore, continuing emphasis on research and development of desalination is important. It is, however, very costly to pump water from sea level inland. In this regard, it has been authoritatively stated that if the Mediterranean Sea were by some miracle turned into fresh water, the cost of transporting that water into the Sahara Desert would still make such a project prohibitively expensive. On the other hand, control of flowing rivers can be made to yield electrical power, which makes it cost practical to lift water to sufficient altitude so that it can be distributed by gravity flow. Development of the NAWAPA concept by the Ralph M. Parsons Company has been based on the company's long experience in developing water projects throughout the world.
So yeah, so you can find that video online and watch the whole thing. It's really good. I highly recommend it if you haven't seen it already. So I'm just going to play one more video and just contrast JFK and NAWAPA's vision for things with this video of RFK Jr. talking about suing power companies and governments over the exact same infrastructure that we're just talking about.
And they sued the Con Ed for what was going on in Storm King, and Con Ed said, "No, you can't sue us. This is a public corporation, and we have a permit to do this." But the court said, for the first time in history, after 2 months of litigation, that environmentalists have standing to sue, that citizens can sue to protect a resource if they can show that they hiked on it or they fish in it, or they take some kind of a spiritual and aesthetic pleasure from it. They don't actually have to own it. And that case, which and a Storm King doctrine that came out of it, was upheld by the Supreme Court, and it opened the door to environmentalists to come into court and start bringing these lawsuits.
So yeah, so I just want to, key in on that, because that's just and it's not to pick on RFK Jr. especially, but it's just the modern example of how environmentalists see these infrastructure projects and how these great infrastructure projects have been demonized, where, we've been fighting this battle for, over 230 years now in this country about, when you have resources in one part of the country and another part of the country needs them, and we're all part of the same country. And the very idea of building infrastructure to deliver resources from one part of the country to enable development in another part of the country is there's so many different ways to stop that. Aaron Burr, he decides to use that problem as a way to profit personally and to enable political corruption with Tammany Hall, help Jefferson get elected, and ultimately, betray Hamilton, leading to Hamilton's death. People like Jeremy Bentham, they enable the philosophy of utilitarianism to be used and deployed against the Alexander von Humboldt orientation of resource development, of infrastructure development. And then, when you have just within the Kennedy family, you have the JFK vision of NAWAPA, which says that, let's foster cooperation and development between Canada, the US, and Mexico, for example, just our two closest neighbors, in kind of this Pan-American spirit that builds on the Monroe Doctrine. And then on the other hand, within his own family, there's a guy saying, "Oh, well, if you go hiking near a reservoir, you have the right to sue because you're enjoying the reservoir." And that's the Benthamite pain pleasure maxim, which says that, well, you get pleasure from the lack of development, so you have the right to say that your pleasure is more important than the benefit that the reservoir brings to society. And that's the thing. That's the danger with these utilitarian rules is that the rules are constantly being rewritten, and no one can agree on when you're dealing with something so subjective, so arbitrary. Whoever is in charge at that moment can determine what brings the most utility. So, sometimes I talk about climate utilitarianism, and this is the thing that Mark Carney and people like that are capitalizing on when it comes to the Green New Deal, is that if you see climate crisis as the existential threat that is going to kill everybody, well, then, of course, building solar panels, bulldozing farms to build solar panels is seen as serving the greater good. And so in a Benthamite pleasure, pain, benefit, spreadsheet calculation, the Green New Deal is a great idea, and it should be done at the expense of everything else. You shouldn't develop anything unless you're trying to stop the climate crisis. So just these ideas, you have to look higher, and that's where looking to Alexander Hamilton, Alexander von Humboldt, JFK, FDR, these are the forebears of the American system, and we have to revive it. So in our area, just to close the loop on the New York City water system and the Catskills, the filtration avoidance determination thing is up for renewal in 2027. And, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to rebalance that relationship and to actually have the benefits of the mega infrastructure projects bear fruit for this area, which is so economically depressed, so afflicted by this infrastructure. If we just return to a Hamiltonian vision, a 21st century American system. So the water is still here, the people are still here, and all we lack is the political will to build again. And so let's let the next chapter begin, and let's revive the spirit of the American system and the report on manufacturers. And that's my presentation. Thank you, everybody.
That was a cool presentation, Alex.
Thank you.
You've done justices to Alex's everywhere.
It's big shoes to fill.
No, man, and the way you were able to weave together these different parts as far as the evolution of a political economy, the idea of the harmony of nature, natural law, and then these false intellectual constructs that are simply there, whether it's the pleasure pain principle or whether it's utilitarianism. Both of these things are designed to bring us out of whack with an ability to just recognize what the Parsons Company was doing pretty well in setting as a preamble. I love that video from 1964 where they weren't just marketing it as an economic project, but as rather a part of the fabric of nature. Is a very Humboldtian philosophy, right, that animated the director's design of that film, by just getting across an appreciation for what is nature and how can human beings work with and be an expression of nature, which is a really common sense thing to do that we've lost touch with. So fantastic work, man. Really great. There's a few questions already waiting to be launched at you, and I noticed that the first person to get in there was Kelly. Kelly, it's all yours.
Hi, Alex.
Hey, Kelly.
Yeah, great presentation. Where are we going here? I live here in Niagara Falls, Ontario, but all my like when I was young, I remember we had a lot of industry here, a lot of chemical companies. All that died away. Everything got polluted, stuff like that. There was a lot of growth here. And it's gone now. On the Canadian side, the industrial growth was never really that big. In fact, all along the Niagara River, they kind of kept it more like a nature kind of like we have a parkway and it's beautiful and tourists come and things like that. On the American side, they had all. That's where they had most of the industry, and even today, it's still basically like a shithole. You could see it on. You could still see the remnants in that. I don't know what's going to happen. What's my point here? I think it's you're saying the same thing. It's like I'm all for preservation. Like it's so easy for me to say, yeah, let's just make all everything, one big park, and we go camping and live every happily ever after. But there's the other side. It's like, yeah, I need we need growth in industry as well, infrastructure. I'm kind of afraid though, once we add like, more of this infrastructure again or rebuilding, it's like I'm afraid like people are going to start getting greedy and not using their sovereign, what is it? Their
Kelly,
their, their moral sense.
Kelly, do you have a question?
Yeah, I guess my question is uh, there's got to be some kind of balance between these two ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where our country has gone wrong. And all the things that you brought up are absolutely true, and have been the battles that have been fought over the last several hundred years. Um, and what's happened to our country, we've been the victim of centuries of psyops, and this is kind of the narratives that Matt, and Cynthia have uncovered and covered quite a bit is, and what Fox and I work on too, is looking back through history and seeing these different philosophical movements, these different cultural movements, like transcendentalism in the 1800s, or the subversion of the Hudson River School of Art around the same time, or the Congress for Cultural Freedom, where they've chipped away at people's ability to reason, to think, and chipped away at Americans' conception of man, the view of man. And it's resulted in this stalemate now where nothing's being developed. And the development that we have had has been utilitarian and hasn't worked out for everybody. And I think that's what killed the nuclear industry in the 60s and 70s was that nuclear plants were predicated on building the biggest possible nuclear plant for the cheapest amount of money. They were ugly. They didn't have a taste. They weren't built with taste, right? They were built to be kind of ugly, brutalist structures, and that made it easy. That made them vulnerable for environmentalists to make people scared of them because people were like, I don't really trust these ugly buildings. And, and that's kind of the brilliance of FDR and the TVA project. Like the Hoover Dam had a lot of, Art Deco isn't really like the greatest, but the Hoover Dam has taste. The Hoover Dam was built to be beautiful, and the success of the New York City water system, the reservoirs, admittedly, are beautiful. They're integrated nicely with the environment, and China is learning these lessons too. And in China, a lot of the mega infrastructure projects are breathtaking to look at. They make the environment look more beautiful. And that is a move to make them more resilient. So it's harder for Chinese people to distrust the mega infrastructure projects because they can credibly say that, oh, development came and actually it made my community nicer. I have a job at the plant. The community is more beautiful. The water is cleaner. Everything's getting better. And it's hard for people to organize against that. And here, the opposite happened. That companies, projects and companies were developed without taste, without cultivation. And if anyone watching, if you're go back to previous presentations about the Hudson River School and Thomas Cole, he talked about this quite a bit. And, he was the American School of Art. Wasn't just about pretty landscapes and preserving nature. It was also about tasteful development. And that's what he talked about constantly was, the potentiality of these American landscapes that right now are we're just nature. But he was seeing a future where, someday they're going to be tasteful towns and gleaming domes and things of this nature that would improve the view and lives of people. So yeah, I also an interesting thing about NAWAPA was something I didn't realize until recently was that it talked about increasing the water flow at Niagara. That was going to be one of the benefits was that water was going to feed into the Great Lakes, and then there'd be greater output at Niagara Falls, which could enable more industry because the electricity from those plants is pretty tapped out because it gets sent out to everything. There's no excess power left there, so uh, figure out a way to increase the water flow there would be a great benefit to Canada and the U.S.
Absolutely. Yeah, people forgot. I mean, I had organized back in my LaRouche organization days for a few years to promote NAWAPA, and Canadians would flip out and they would go emotionally ballistic, by and large, around the idea that no, Americans want to steal our water. They've always wanted that. And, there's like this neurotic disorder that's been baked into Canadians. But it's like when you look at the plan, it would also involve massive increases for Canadians, and a barge canal would have been a direct offshoot that would flow right through the prairies, increasing the bounty of water availability to farmers, and then clean out the Great Lakes. There's no solution to clean out the Great Lakes that would do it and then replenish it. So much benefit on that front too. It's
Is it
wild.
true? Is it true that I just saw this. I saw like a scary Canadian video about NAWAPA, and they're saying that, oh, it's going to destroy Winnipeg, or they want to like put Winnipeg underwater. Is that actually true, or is that a distortion?
I'm pretty sure it's a distortion. I
Yeah.
mean, there might be certain areas, frankly, I mean, I got to look at the details. I don't think. Yeah, there honestly there would be certain areas that would be flooded. Okay, yeah, it's true, but by and large,
Yeah.
though, it wouldn't beat Winnipeg, as you could
Right.
definitely save all of these communities, and there. Oh, Magdalena has a thought.
But they're flooded every year anyway. Right
Well, that's true,
now,
eh? There's floods
every
going on,
year is
right?
spring floods there. Every year. Okay.
Yeah, that's a great point. Right. So you'd actually, yeah, deal with flood controls by having this thing in place. That's correct. Yeah, good point. Good point. Well, that said, Magdalena, you got the stage. What's your thought?
Yes. Okay. No, when you were describing, Alex, thank you so much. That was very illuminating. Okay. So when you were describing this whole idea about preservation and putting things aside, and what came to my mind was my brother. Okay. So as probably people know by now, I'm from Switzerland originally. I grew up on a farm. My brother is now running the farm. Okay. So I was there visiting one year, and so I was looking at the fields, and there was this one field that looked completely not cultivated. And I said, "What is this here? What are you growing here?" And he goes, "I'm not growing anything. I'm only growing weeds,
Yeah.
not the green stuff. Okay, weeds. Okay." I'm going like, "What?" And he goes like, "Yeah, the government pays me not to grow anything on this land." I'm going like, "You're kidding me." He goes, "Yeah, okay. This is part of this whole how to keep the quotas in Europe,
Yep.
right? How to not overproduce too much food, okay?" And he said, "I would rather grow something because quite frankly, so there's weeds now growing on this fallow field, and then of course you cannot tell the weeds where the seeds of the weeds are going. So you have to invest more money into weed control for the other fields." He says it's completely ridiculous, but that's what's happening. And this is Switzerland, right? Okay. Again, big environmental hub of the environmentalists pushing their agenda. So when you said that, I just reminded me. So I had to share.
Yeah, I mean, and that there's so many stories like that. I know that FDR, as an emergency measure during the 30s, they were paying farmers not to grow, because they didn't want to crash the markets with cheap food, and they wanted farmers to, for their business model, it was better to artificially keep food prices protected in some way, which is difficult. But yeah, I mean, the thing about that is, you think about kind of the economic turmoil going on right now with tariffs and whatnot, and um, this kind of just-in-time production applied to everything. And yeah, it would make more sense. There are aspects to like local farming, which why don't we allow farmers to farm the way they want to and have the choice to use capital-intensive methods, fertilizer, yes, GMOs. GMOs can be very positive for farmers because GMOs sometimes enable farmers to use less pesticide. It's just a balance of like these different bars of things with farmers where it's like they have GMOs, they have pesticides, and they have other capital intensive fertilizer. I'm sorry, pesticide, fertilizer, GMOs, and it's like, okay, well, if you want to farm without GMOs, then you have to use a lot more pesticide and a lot more fertilizer. Or if you want to do less, no-till method, maybe you want to use GMOs. So just letting farmers make those decisions and
yeah, just to
make it
add,
profitable.
I mean, a farmer obviously he is very good at figuring out what's cost effective and what is not.
Yeah.
Otherwise he's going to go under, right? So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, right. And the other thing too is, the PSYOP that's says either we're going to pay farmers not to farm or we're going to force them to use regenerative, non-capital intensive methods. There's just that is playing back into kind of the hard limits to growth where if you don't use capital intensive methods, then you can't support a growing population. You can support a decreasing population and give them less calories. So, there's all kinds of balance there, but yeah, there's a lot of problems with the idea that not farming, not paying people not to farm, or paying them to reduce their footprint of farming. There are a lot of aspects of it that are tied to some shady things.
And I'm going to add a thought based on what Jenny had asked in the chat, where she asks, so where does the government get the money to pay someone not to grow something? Uwe responded with, the money is caused by national debt, which contributes to bankrupt the country. Bring in the IMF, you know the game. And then Jerry added, they grow bugs, which was pretty funny. Now, this is sort of like, based on what you were saying, this strikes me kind of like it's an inverse perversion of the Hamiltonian system, because Hamilton created a productive credit system. It wasn't based on tying the dollar to a one-to-one relationship with gold or silver, though you should have some gold or silver as your reserve. It wasn't based on that. But it was based on the idea that you can increase in a calculated way, relatively, your productive powers of labor by building very specific projects that you could measure within a certain time were going to create the means to extinguish the debt. So it's like what they're doing is moving towards an evil, like the Green New Deal, right? That's taking the FDR idea of the New Deal and turning it inside out, so that they're creating debts that are tied to doing things, but the things that they're doing are going to have the effect of shutting down our production. So it's kind of like an inverse thing, and making, of course, the debt also grow bigger and bigger because you're not creating the means of extinguishing your debt the way Hamilton prescribes. So that was just a thought that popped into my head. I don't know if that's...
Well, and there's all kinds of policies and things like that. But I think the common thread with everything, every time I do one of these presentations, or I look into, catch up with the work that Matt and Cynthia are doing, or what, Fox is doing with documentaries, it always comes back to beyond policies and beyond saying, oh, if we move this money over here and do this or that, there's something higher where the fundamental view of man has been so corrupted in our society, and it has to start there. The policies, maybe we can work backward and make people see the light in some ways, but the fundamental view of man is where all this stuff is springing forth from. And from there, if we can change that in just a percentage of the society, or make leaders have a healthier view of man, the policies will follow that make sense. Because farming, for example, is totally messed up. The farmers are under all kinds of pressures. They live in debt, and what's offered to them as a solution to the debt that is imposed on them is either to plow over their fields and build solar panels and wind turbines, or it's to not grow, or it's to get grants to make a smaller amount of food using regenerative organic methods, or it's to do agritourism and do like turn their farm into Disneyland, basically. It's totally messed up. Whereas, why do we have farms? Is to make food. So but it has to start with changing people's fundamental view of man versus these policies, which have all kinds of other side effects.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's that when you read Hamilton, that's really a distinguishing character throughout his writings as an economist. He's always like dealing with every opportunity he gets at the nature of man and the nature of creative of the mind, which is a breath of fresh air that we really lost. Hassan, it's all yours.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, and a great presentation, Lance.
Thank you.
So my question was, for a lot of big infrastructure projects, as an example around energy, the energy reserves are typically used as collateral to secure the credit that then builds the infrastructure, coal, oil, nuclear. Is there any historical record around water and the treatment of water as actually the collateral that supports the provision of credit? I've actually looked for things like that in terms of how water is treated, and I couldn't find very much. So yeah, I was just wondering if you had any opinion on it.
I haven't seen anything on that specific question. I honestly don't know. I've mostly seen public projects about this, and I do know that the sale of water is what usually funds the project ultimately. Like if New York City were to build a water filtration plant, it would have to be bonded. And I know the issue with New York City is that there's a limit to how much money they can bond, and building a water filtration plant would take them to the very limit of that and would have to be paid back over 30 years through people's water bills. And part of the issue in New York City is that they don't meter their water. It's famously an unmetered city, so it's like the benefit of living in New York City is that you can have a lot of water and you don't really have to pay for it. So I'm not sure about how that works exactly, but that's a good question.
Cool. Jerry, are you still there?
Yes, I'm still there. Thanks, Matt.
Sure.
And thanks, Alex. Wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I was just thinking, because when you started off and you were talking about Burr and how they set up that Manhattan Water Company, it was a legal loophole that they snuck in. And it's the same thing with the law they made to ban development around the reservoirs in where you live in Kingston. It was a law. So it's like you can't argue the logic of this thing anymore. They just go, that's the law. You got to deal with it. And I find the biggest pollution in the world today is not water pollution or air pollution. It's pollution in the legal system. It's just so horrible. And I know, I hate to pick on him too, but RFK Jr., he's not an environmentalist. He's a lawyer.
Absolutely.
And he's not a medical expert. Yeah, he's a lawyer. And that's the part I dislike about him. But
yeah.
I mean, Alexander Hamilton was a lawyer too. He was a good one. And Burr was a lawyer, and he was maybe you could do a class on the different kind of thinking among lawyers. But my question is, to get to it, I'm looking at Trump, and he seems to be taking a sledgehammer, not to the environment, but to the environmental laws. He pulled out of the Paris Stupid Accords, and he's getting rid of a lot of these environmental laws which are blocking development. And I'm just, as a Canadian, I don't really get to talk to Americans. So I'm just wondering, what is the outlook of Americans? Do they see this sledgehammer of Trump against this, corrupt law as actually going to help things, that they might open it up for development in the U.S. again?
Well, from what I've seen from industry people in the energy world is that the amount of red tape around energy infrastructure development is secondary to the underlying ideology of people. And um, like the environmental regulations, uh, they're not really what has held back development of nuclear plants, for example. It's been more that we don't have an industrial policy in this country that has traditionally incentivized the growth of industry in this country because, as the global hegemon, we're constantly, using our energy to make Bitcoin and to play games with money, and then import our stuff from other countries rather than saying, oh, actually, it makes sense to build a factory here, and therefore, to power the factory, we need a nuclear plant. So I think that, but I totally, Jerry, it feels like you were listening to my conversation with Fox earlier because we were talking about the lawyerliness of of RFK Jr. and also Nicole Shanahan. Nicole Shanahan was posting, this is related to your question tangentially, but Nicole Shanahan was in a debate with the founder of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, Jack Dorsey was talking about IP law and how basically IP, intellectual property was invented to protect the inventor from monopolists. But the way intellectual property law is used today is that it protects monopolists from inventors. And that people are pointing out that in China, even though China is viewed as a totalitarian communist country, innovation is happening faster in China because they don't have intellectual property laws. So what people are doing is that people with great ideas who are making discoveries, they're not shackled by intellectual property law. And that in China, then, for the benefit of their society and for humanity, they're innovating on things. And here in the United States, all our companies can do is whine about people in China ripping them off, but really, it's people in China are taking the technology and actually doing something with it, whereas in our country we can't because everything is kind of under lock and key, and you get sued if you try to innovate on anything. So again, that's the problem with lawyers in this country, intellectual property, and also following unjust laws, like in New York State. Taking it back to where I live, Andrew Cuomo, when he had presidential ambitions, he passed what's called the nation-leading climate law in New York State. And what this law did is that even though it's a law, it's on the books, it basically cripples development, any chance of development in our state, and it's destroying our energy infrastructure. And politicians, even though the very people that drove Andrew Cuomo out of office and who say that he's a monstrous rapist and all this terrible stuff, they're like, but we have to follow his climate law because it's the law and it's in the books. And it wasn't ever written to be followed, but they're using it in a lawyerly way to say that, well, because of this climate law written by this terrible rapist, we cannot build a factory. We have to bulldoze the farms to build solar panels. It's ridiculous. And, that is the problem. And, I'm not directly answering your question, but I think tangentially I am. It's the same idea.
Yeah, I remember when I'd taken an elective in university, and I just felt like my analytical side of my brain was atrophying, being in the fine arts world. And so I took an elective, and it was a criminal law class. And the first lesson that the teacher gave, who was a practicing lawyer, a member of the Privy Council, was the first lesson is law is not about justice; it's about can you win the case. And that was the first lesson to this auditorium of like 100 young aspiring lawyers, is that justice doesn't exist if you want to be a good lawyer. Which I think is a very different idea of justice or law than that which Lincoln or Hamilton had in mind when they were studying. So just deep irony there.
Absolutely.
So we have time for maybe one more question. If people have something pressing on their chest and on their mind that want to get out into words, now is your chance to do that before we have to wrap it up.
I've got something.
All right, Richard, go.
On your last point, John Adams um, originally, the so-called Boston Massacre was very accusatory, but then he changed his mind and ended up defending the soldiers that fired. So, I mean, the idea of a lawyer that was really looking for justice, I think, comes out there. Anyway, that's all.
Yeah, I only know about that because I just watched the John Adams show on HBO, the miniseries, and it wasn't pro Hamilton enough for for my taste. But that anecdote was an entire episode on the show, and I didn't know that. That's really interesting. Like he was actually trying to do the right thing, which was speaks highly of him.
Yeah, the context is really important, right? I mean, there's no formula for being right all the time, like a lot of people want. You always have to think, okay, well, what is this situation call for? Because the same act might be just or unjust depending on context. So, and that's also what I like. I mean, for people who want to watch some shows, there are things like the Three Kingdoms and a lot of these Chinese, especially the period dramas that I've been watching with Cynthia. A lot of them are really good. The Double is another one on Netflix. The story of the Pearl Girl, really long shows, but they're always getting at the meritocratic system that teaches leaders how to lead in China, which is not really based on multiple choice questions or getting the right answer, but it's really built around here's a scenario, what's the best thing to do, and there's no one right answer, and the emperor who's being schooled, who's being tutored, has to come up with, or the member of somebody who's going to be a member of the of the legal world or whatever, as they're going through their education process, they just have to come up with scenarios and justify why they have this or that other position. And it's a really healthy way of doing things that we don't really have much of that in the West when we're getting tested anymore.
Can we compare that to the most popular shows in America? They're being incentivized. Like either it's shows like Succession or Billions, which are about oligarchical succession drama, like who's going to inherit the money and run the company, or it's Severance, where it's like the heavily funded show by Apple that just happens to be about putting a chip in your brain and becoming a drone, and normalizing like, oh well, what would happen to your relationship if that happened? Like like I don't know if you watched that show, Matt. Have you checked it out?
I feel like I should probably dig through the dumpster a little bit. All right, send me a link.
I mean, it's on Apple TV. It's like the biggest show right now.
Well, it's Severance?
Yeah.
All right. I'll watch it. I'll give it a shot. Well, yeah, okay.
I'd be very curious to know what your thoughts are about it.
Like a Black Mirror thing, sort of, or a Dark Mirror.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, Black Mirror. Black Mirror is literally like, oh yeah, like one-off episodes of what would happen if you put a chip in your brain. But yeah, this is like a whole series about it. And what's interesting is that, someone like Joe Rogan just endorsed the show where he's like, oh, this is a great show. And then like literally right after in a row, he had on Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, Andreessen, Mark Andreessen. And it's just very interesting culturally wondering like what, when you think about cultural programming, like what are we being prepared for with this show? Even though it's a very, there's a lot of artfulness to it, a lot of craft. It's well shot and the actors are good. It's curious, like what is the real message here that we're supposed to take from it versus, in China, like you said, these shows that are preparing a class of people to be, great leaders, right? Like the values that are being communicated to them.
All right. Absolutely. Well, if our society's fit to survive, at some point we're going to have to make a film series on Alexander Hamilton that goes far beyond what that. I don't know. I'll give it the benefit of the doubt, and I'll say honest attempt to do justice with the stage performance, which I really don't think it is. I think it was dishonest, and I think it's probably crap.
I still haven't subjected myself to it.
I've watched a few. I haven't seen it from front to back, but it's weak, and people say, And maybe they're right that it's increasing interest in Hamilton, but I'm not seeing evidence that that it's bearing fruit, that people are actually studying Hamilton's writings. I know they're buying more of his books for their bookshelves, but I don't know if it's really working.
It's
I mean,
entertainment. It's entertainment.
Well, I treat it as a button I can press, a win now button I can press in conversations with liberals. Like, I'm like, oh, well, Hamilton was for this, so you have to be for it too. So
Yeah, right.
it works to a limited extent. It works, but yeah, the deeper understanding is not there.
Yeah, it's for like healthy sophistry.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, this was great. Thank you so much, Alex. We'll get this up and readily available for people to rewatch and share as soon as possible. That was awesome, and I'm looking forward to seeing what else you and Fox come up with. Also, this episode 3 thing. When's the deadline or the hoped for ETA for that film to come out? I've been waiting for it for a while now. Of the energy.
No, Fox is here. You should jump in.
Yo, Fox. When's that movie coming out?
Hopefully soon. I don't know, within hopefully a month or two, if I can really focus on it.
Cool.
A lot of it's going to take place in the Hudson Valley, and I'm kind of waiting for spring to have greenery again, because as Alex illustrated, the environmental movement was born through eugenesis of the Hudson Valley, and a lot of it ties back into, unfortunately, the Kennedy family and Silent Spring, and it's a lot of crazy stuff. So, but it's a shitload of stuff I'm tying together, but hopefully I can pull it off before summer hits. So,
Great. That's going to be a hot potato. And if people want to help out, I'm just going to throw this out there for the recording. If anybody wants to help out with a financial donation, that can be done on spacecommune.com. I know that helps make these things a reality. Also, Space Commune Substack, that's in the description box of this video. Everyone should get subscribed, get a paid upgrade if you can. And once again, thank you guys. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this Sunday.
Thank you, Matt.